Hey guys, it's Gavin T360 and welcome to what I like to call Ultimate TV Showdown. This is the culmination of a year full of watching nothing but new TV shows. The project has always been the same, to watch as many new shows that I possibly can within the span of a year, rank the shows from worst to best, and to summarize my experience and takeaways from them. I had no idea that I'd be watching more than 30 completely shows though, so making this video turned out to be a lot harder than I thought it would be. So, in the interest of keeping my sanity, this will be split into two videos that will probably take a very long time for me to release, but it is what it is. Anyways, let's focus more on the details. The longer shows took me months to watch, while some of the shorter ones only took me about a day. What I'm saying is, not all of these shows are created equally, especially when you consider that I'm comparing shows of very different genres and styles, like comparing apples and oranges. But aside from the unfair nature of this list, I still thought that it would be a fun challenge for myself to rank these very different shows. This ranking will also include miniseries, because I really wanted to talk about the Marvel shows too, and I don't really discriminate in the size of the show as long as it is one. I'm also including seasons of shows that came out in 2021, even if I've seen seasons prior, namely Rick and Morty, Big Mouth, and Big Brother. Everything else is something that I have never seen before, hence why it's such a random selection. I wanted a completely unbiased opinion, so watching shows I love to rewatch would do nothing but interfere with my studies. With that being said, here is the full list of shows I've watched this year: Game of Thrones, The Stand, WandaVision, Arrested Development, Bojack Horseman, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Living with Yourself, Invincible, The End of the Effing World, Infinity Train, M.O.D.O.K, Love, Death and Robots, Better Call Saul, Twin Peaks, Loki, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, American Horror Story, Attack on Titan, Rick and Morty, The Owl House, Monsters at Work, American Horror Stories, Big Brother, Marvel's What If, The Boys, Only Murders in the Building, Squid Game, Big Mouth, Inside Job, The Haunting of Hill House, The Haunting of Bly Manor, Hawkeye, and It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Whew! Now that everyone's introduced, let's get started. Wow, this spin-off of the much better American Horror Story really sucks. It's like if Black Mirror was written by kindergartners, but like really horny kindergartners. Wait, that sounds wrong. Every single episode was so dull and uninteresting and just lacking to the point that it was a chore to finish the series, despite the fact that it was only 7 episodes. And the worst thing about this show is that three of those 7 episodes are about Murder House. Every time American Horror Story touches Murder House, it retroactively makes the original season worse and worse. Apocalypse was one thing, but this series stapling more and more stories to this jumbled mess of a story is the straw that broke the camel's back. I hope if they continue this series that they actually put creativity and especially originality into them next time, because the only entertainment I got out of these episodes was watching the opening credits. That's it. That was the only good thing about these episodes. So it goes without saying, but I'll say it anyways, that this is the worst show that I watched in 2021. Congratulations, American Horror Stories. You win. You suck.
Uh, Meow?
The Stand, 2020. The acting is garbage, the effects are garbage, and it's just terribly, horribly not entertaining at all. Somehow, this miniseries is nearly twice as long as the original, and yet it feels completely hollow. The characters are barely developed whatsoever. The characters that they do focus on and develop are completely pointless and end up dying in the least interesting way possible. You could argue that it's only bad because the book is bad, but oh wait, there is already a much better adaptation with a much smaller budget made back in 1994. Why are they trying again? Because the film industry is out of ideas. Um, yeah, that's about it. I love James Marsden,
Uh, meow?
but this was really bad, and I don't even have anything else to say about it.
Attention everyone! Run for your lives! Robots have taken over the world!
The long awaited Love, Death, and Robots Season 2 was very hit or miss to me, just like the first season, although I'd argue that this time around it was a considerably weaker package. To start, this season is significantly shorter than the first, so it was never even really given a chance to succeed. But even the best episodes of this season are no match to the first season's best episodes. There were only two episodes this time around that I actually ended up enjoying, and those were episode 5, The Tall Grass, and episode 8, The Drowned Giant. Neither of these are incredible or anything, but I at least vibe well with the atmosphere and art design enough to enjoy them. I liked episode 1, Automated Customer Service, but the animation is just fucking horrible. It hurts to look at, and it just soiled the experience. Also, I'm getting a little bit tired of the same old quote unquote technology bad stories. The rest of the episodes were not bad or anything, but they were just really uninteresting and not worth watching, in my opinion, which is kind of sad because, especially after saying all of that, I feel pretty bad for this show. Season 1 had so many great shorts that I still remember vividly, but Season 2 really just dropped the ball completely. I really hope they're able to salvage this series because it has incredible potential, and I don't want to see any of that potential go to waste. But as it is, it's not doing great.
Welcome to the Himalayas!
I don't know what exactly I was expecting from a sequel to Monsters Inc., but I guess I was just hoping it would at least have Mike and Sully as the main characters. Monsters Inc. is my favorite Pixar movie and also just my favorite Disney movie, so to watch it get swept into Disney's desire to capitalize on our childhood nostalgia makes me pretty upset. But let's get the good things out of the way first. Mike and Sully are in nearly every episode of the show and usually have their own B plot going on, so in terms of giving us new content with those beloved characters, it fills that void, if only just a little bit. It's also great to see the incredible side characters like Celia, Roz, Needleman and Smitty, and that one guy who slipped on a soccer ball. And it's interesting to see how they're all adapting to their new environment. The Abominable Snowman episode was a really great way to retroactively help the poor guy out, and that was definitely my favorite episode. The Big Wazowski episode was a genius concept, and I think they missed the opportunity to make John Goodman act like a crazy bowler again. That's about all the positives I could say for the show, however. The new central protagonists are so dull and uninteresting that I was kind of surprised. They have such bland and contrived conflicts that I basically don't remember any of the episodes other than the Mike and Sully parts. They have character arcs and life lessons that feel so lifeless and elementary that I can't possibly understand what was going through Disney's mind when making this show. Yes, it's a kids show, but it's designed to draw in fans of Monsters Inc. to watch it. And Monsters Inc. is now 20 years old, which means the audience attracted to the series does not need to be taught Sesame Street lessons. And we're really just here to watch Billy Crystal and John Goodman bring back two of the most likable characters of all time. Why do we have to sit through 20 minutes of bland and unfunny garbage just to see Mike give a lecture on the purpose of a knock knock joke for 2 minutes? I don't want to dislike this show, but just saying all of this out loud really makes me realize how much I didn't enjoy this.
Finally, a good reason to punch a teenager in the face!
The End of the Effing World is a show that I watched this year and completely forgot about the moment I finished it. I have no negative feelings about the show. I remember somewhat liking it, but even when I recollect through the full story, I definitely think it was not a show that I would ever revisit again. The characters and their journeys were entertaining, but they really left no impact whatsoever. I'd recommend the show to the small amount of people who like bizarre, edgy coming of age stories. but if you're anything like me, then I wouldn't spend much of your time on it. The show will forever be filed in the boring manila folder in the back of my mind. Even if they made a season 3, which I really don't think they will, I don't think I'll be tuning into it.
The gloved Mandalorian armor gauntlet of Boba Fett.
M.O.D.O.K. M.O.D.O.K was good. Was it amazing? Definitely not, but it was serviceable television. It was decently funny, well casted, and a fun little show to watch. The animation style was very enjoyable, and I liked that it didn't take itself very seriously. It's definitely not a very memorable show, as I'm really struggling to find something more to talk about. To be fair, it's a very short watch that doesn't stand out in any strong way, but if you're into a satirical superhero show, then this may be the one for you. I have nothing else to say. I don't know why I come back to this show every season. I just do. Maybe I think the show is genuinely funny or entertaining, or maybe I just like torturing myself. But that's just the thing. I don't know. I can't seem to figure out whether I love the show or despise it. The twisted comedy, the god awful animation, and the crude nature of the show all combine to make what I believe is an addictively terrible show. I think I feel the same way about this as I did with 13 Reasons Why. I was able to watch that whole series, but I hated the whole thing throughout. The only difference is Rotten Tomatoes seems to disagree strongly. Either way, comparing it to the vast majority of the other shows I watched this year, this one does do so good. So I'll see you next season, Big Mouth. The Falcon and the Winter Soldier was definitely an alright show, but I wouldn't say it went above and beyond in any particular way. The fight scenes were always pretty good, Zemo was pretty entertaining, and I'm very happy to get genuine character development for Sam and Bucky, and their relationship was the exact kind of buddy cop dynamic I was looking for. John Walker was a very engaging villain for most of the show, until the ending where he really didn't matter all that much. Sharon was a very confusing character to me, so I think I might have to rewatch the show 6 or 7 times to actually get a grip on her. Carly was an acceptable character, but didn't compel me one way or the other to care about her antics. Her death, and therefore the end of the main conflict, was pretty abrupt and didn't leave much of an impact. I like to look at the show mostly as character development for the title characters, so the villains being secondary to that is acceptable. I got enough action, comedy, and good character development to feel satisfied from this show, and I am excited to see where the MCU can go from there. But as a whole, this was definitely the weakest Marvel show to come out this year. Inside Job was a pretty good show, but really didn't leave much of an impact on me. It had entertaining protagonists with Reagan, the socially inept leader, Brett, the socially gifted co leader, and a wide group of slightly underdeveloped weirdos. The show's concept that every conspiracy theory ever made is true and is hidden by the government is a really strong premise and has a lot of potential for creative and fun episodes. But where I think the show falls flat a bit is the execution of some of those episodes. Most of the time, the episode is centered around one conspiracy and how the characters have to interact with it. Hilarity ensues, and the characters learn a lesson on how to be a better person. This episode structure is fine on paper, but for an adult animated show, it feels a bit bland to me. I do like when characters learn lessons on bettering themselves, but the cause for this show seems to be the creativity and fun. When the characters' personal struggles take up 95% of the episode, I sometimes completely forget the premise of the show. What I'm saying is, I think they need to do a better job of incorporating the supernatural elements of the show with the character struggles. Otherwise, the premise of the show will be essentially wasted on another trope filled drama. There are a few episodes that work well, but as a whole, I think the series so far is a mixed bag.
Oh no! Oh no!
Oh no!
Oh yeah!
I have some serious mixed feelings about this show. Sometimes I think it's one of the best Marvel shows of the year, and on other days I think it's one of the weakest. In this one's defense, I liked almost every episode and how they explored characters we've come to know over the years in new and creative ways. Captain Carter was a good starting point for the series, essentially remodeling the events of Captain America the First Avenger around a different character entirely. T'Challa's Star-Lord was probably my favorite episode of the whole series because it gives us a taste of a massively different universe that's very entertaining. Not to mention the pretty awesome Collector boss fight at the end. Episode 3 had a good ending, Episode 4 was pretty fantastic overall, Episode 5 had the zombie apocalypse, which is something that I've always secretly wanted. That episode was pretty amazing. Paul Rudd was a floating head in it. What more could I ask for? Episodes 6 and 7 were definitely the weakest of the batch. Killmonger was cool, but he was just being himself, so they weren't really breaking any new ground. And the Party Thor episode was really underwhelming and boring. The final 2 episodes were alright by bringing together most of the previous multiverses into a cool battle with an omnipotent god, although it does feel like half of the characters that they brought to bring down Ultron didn't end up doing anything at all. Regardless, I think this show is pretty good. It has a lot of potential for creative stories with the large amount of MCU characters it has, and I'm very excited to see where it can go from here. But I do think as a whole I enjoyed most of the other Marvel shows of the year instead.
Look at us. Look at us. Huh? Who would have thought? Not me.
Living with Yourself was a show that was probably made just for me. For those of you that don't know, I'm a huge fan of Paul Rudd and everything that he's in. It all started around the time when I was rewatching Friends for the 30th time, and I realized that Paul Rudd's character, Mike Hannigan, was by far my most favorite character in the whole show. When I took a step back, I realized that he was my favorite character in just about everything he was in. So, when I heard that a show came out in 2019 where there was not one, but 2 Paul Rudds, I knew I had to check it out. Now, I'll be completely honest on the quality of the show and try to keep my biases in check, but I gotta say, I really enjoyed this show. Paul Rudd was charming as always and spread that charisma into the roots of the show, causing me to always smile when thinking about it. The premise of this show is that Paul Rudd's character, Miles, finds himself at a cloning facility disguised as a spa. Miles unknowingly clones a new version of himself that's supposed to be a more uplifting and optimistic version of himself. The cloning facility is supposed to make sure that the original Miles is killed and buried, but fails to do so, and both versions of Miles come on the loose. They meet each other and try to figure out a life where they could both be happy, but keeping a clone a secret is a very difficult task. Hilarity and drama ensues. The show itself comes off like an early 2000s comedy due to the fact that most people involved have previously worked on similar feeling projects. I do feel like this show would have been a bit better if it were actually a movie, because in total, this show is about 3.5 hours long, and admittedly, some episodes drag out a little longer than necessary. If it were a clean 2.5 hours, I think this would have made a really solid movie, but I can't complain too much in having plenty of time to enjoy double Paul Rudd action.
That's what she said.
In total, I really like this show. It's nothing incredible, but it's a very enjoyable experience that I'd happily recommend to anyone. And like I said, it's only about 3.5 hours, making this one of the shortest shows I watched last year. If I could binge watch it in one afternoon, so could you.
I have been falling for 30 minutes.
I really can't decide whether or not I like Loki more or less than the previous 2 MCU shows. On one hand, I fell in love with WandaVision in its early episodes, and I still think that the show had the strongest start. On the other hand, both WandaVision and Falcon and the Winter Soldier had endings that did not have nearly as much of an impact as I wish they'd had. Loki fits right into the middle of that. The start wasn't amazing, but it was entertaining and got my attention. The show stayed fairly consistent in that quality all the way to the end, where the finale was not that bad, but about on course with the other 2 shows. But in this one's case, the ending will directly lead into another season, so the flaws aren't nearly as detrimental as they could have been. Overall, I really enjoyed the show the most when it was just 2 characters having intelligent conversations, and I'd argue that this show has significantly stronger writing than the previous 2 shows. My favorite episode of the show is probably the second episode, where the majority of the time spent was Loki and Mobius having conversations about the TVA. The problem with the rest of the show is that it's lacking in energy. The action scenes aren't anything fun to watch, the antagonists are pretty lame, and a lot of the twists and reveals were just okay. Don't get me wrong, I liked pretty much every episode, but my reasons for liking them were essentially because I could watch Tom Hiddleston and Owen Wilson talk for hours. There were other aspects of the show that I liked too, like the different variations of Loki in episode 5. They were the type of chaos I was hoping for in this show, so all of the Loki shenanigans were quite a joy to watch. I think that the romance between Loki and Sylvie is comically amazing, because that's the most narcissistic romance of all time, and it fits the character flawlessly. And don't get me started about the soundtrack. It's just incredible, and it gives off such a unique vibe that befits the show perfectly. So, in conclusion, I really like the show, but it does have a few aspects holding it back for me. I wouldn't rank it as high as other MCU projects or other shows in this list.
Every single person sitting here was a part of history, and I wouldn't want any of that to be fractured because of a misunderstanding.
I admit it, I watch reality television. Well, it's actually just this one. I've been watching Big Brother since season 14, and I've come to really enjoy it over the years. I've always found the challenges to be really fun, the household drama to be super entertaining, and the eviction night to be intense and exciting. There have been seasons that, for lack of a better term, suck. Maybe there's a lack of likable house guests, maybe the twist of the season is terrible, or maybe the season is just way too boring. In BB21's case, all of the above. But this time around, however, I think the season avoids most of those pitfalls. The majority of the house is filled with kind and likable players, all with entertaining plans and strategies, and the twist of the season, while not being anything grand, doesn't completely ruin the game. But in all fairness, this season is a little bit boring. Don't get me wrong, there was never a point where I was too bored, but there was definitely a point where the season stopped being unpredictable. Tiffany's plan was just too good. Every single week was another nail in the coffin for those outside of the Cookout Alliance, and 7 or 8 weeks straight of watching the plan work perfectly got just a little bit old. The final six rejuvenated the spirit of Big Brother, given that the plan was officially over and now the players can finally get competitive, but that only gave us around 3 or so weeks of entertaining gameplay. Kylan's confrontation with Xavier after being evicted was probably the only compelling drama of the whole season, and in that scenario, it didn't feel good to watch because Kylan took it way too far and still won't own up to it. What a guy. Asshole aside, I think Xavier was more than deserving of the victory, definitely more than the two competition flops, Ozza and Big D. And overall, I think this will go down as one of the better seasons of Big Brother. I can only hope that Celebrity Big Brother holds its ground this winter. Twin Peaks is a show that I was never planning on watching, but I'm very glad I did. The reason I watched it was because Netflix was just about to banish it from their site, and I figured that I should probably knock it out when I had the chance. I didn't know much about the show except that it was some kind of cult classic 90s mystery drama. The story takes place after a local teen girl is found murdered in horrific fashion. We follow Special Agent Dale Cooper as he investigates the murder and comes to know the residents and history of the small town. There are many side characters with interconnecting plot lines that form around the main plot to give context to even the smallest of details. Some of these stories are fun and interesting, with likable characters that liven the show, while other side plots are exceptionally annoying and or boring as hell. The series is overall rather slow regardless, and for every solution or advancement to the plot, there's an entire new issue that the character needs to fight through. All the way to the end, there are very few satisfying moments where the current mystery is overcome in any particular way. Even the ending of the show leaves the audience on a very unsatisfying cliffhanger, with most of the plot threads not being completed in the slightest. These cliffhangers may or may not have been resolved in the sequel series, but I myself can't imagine watching this original show and then having to wait 25 whole years to continue the story. Plot aside, the show has its charm. There are many endearing characters that I would love to just hang out with in person, and there are some unintentionally hysterical moments in this show. The feeling of mystery is surprisingly powerful, and I felt myself actively engaged consistently throughout the whole show, despite its snail pace. It's an atmospheric pleasure of a show, and it gives off so many warm and inviting small town vibes that I could easily tell why it became such a cult classic. It's definitely not the best show I've seen this year, but I have no doubts that I will revisit this show in the future. The Haunting of Bly Manor was good, but not nearly as good as The Haunting of Hill House. It has a solid story that keeps my interest for most of the show, Although I did get a little bored near the end because for whatever reason, this series was not really scary at all. Instead, it's trying to tell more of a character driven story, but as I will eventually get into, The Haunting of Hill House manages to do a better job at both the story and the horror. But to give this show the credit it does deserve, I have to say that I love the characters in this. Every actor does a truly fine job at selling their character, and I finished the show with two characters that I absolutely loved. Jamie, who originally came off as a smartass, but grew to be incredibly loving and wholesome, and then Owen, who is consistently the most awesome and wholesome person I may have ever seen on television. I love him so much. But, characters aside, nothing else really blew me away in this show, and I am much more likely to rewatch Hill House than this one.
Who?
Anne. She's the girl I'm kind of hanging out with.
I haven't met him.
Yes, you have.
Michael had met Anne.
Yeah, so I wasn't actually that big of a fan of Arrested Development. I still acknowledge that it's a great show, at least for the first 3 seasons, but overall, I'm not that impressed with it. Unlike Bly Manor, which we just discussed, almost none of the characters are very likable in this show, and I understand that that's on purpose, but I much prefer shows like Community or Parks and Rec, which have an ensemble cast of extremely likable people. Tobias and Job stick out to me as the most entertaining characters in this batch, both having some admittedly hilarious moments each. Maybe and George Michael are also moderately fun to watch and aren't nearly as unlikable as the adults, but as for everyone else, I don't like them. I found myself bored out of my mind when it came to characters such as Buster, Lucille, and George Sr., not because they're bad actors, far from it, but their style of comedy is really just not my thing. But there's still a reason why this show is still moderately high up on this ranking, and that's because I think this is one of the smartest shows ever written, in the sense that it mastered the running gag. And while at this point I hardly remember anything that happened in the show, the running gags will probably stick with me forever and crack me up out of nowhere. Anyways, that's about all I got for this show. It's already been well over a year since I watched it, so my memory's running dry. Hopefully, though, there's no more high quality shows that bore me to death. Oh no.
Hi, I'm Saul Goodman. Did you know that you have rights? The Constitution says you do.
I really have no idea how to feel about this show, but I'm just gonna be honest and say it. Better Call Saul is way too slow for me. I watched it for the same reason that most people watched it, because it's a sequel series to one of, if not the best show to ever be put on television. And boy, is that a rough comparison, because this, in my opinion, does not have anywhere near as much stage presence as Breaking Bad. I can still remember nearly every single episode of Breaking Bad, and it's been well over a year since I watched it. But for the life of me, I can't tell you a single thing that happens in season 2 of Better Call Saul. Like, seriously. The whole show is so slow, and nothing happens for most of it, so it ends up being entirely forgettable. Which is bizarre, because this show is full of incredibly likable characters that are amazingly well written and have very entertaining dialogue. The thing is, though, 5 seasons of only dialogue doesn't make for such a compelling show, at least in my opinion. Breaking Bad struck a genuinely perfect balance when it came to entertaining the audience by raising the stakes to the extreme on a regular basis. Better Call Saul obviously can't have the same emotional stakes as Breaking Bad, mostly because it's a prequel and we know who is and who isn't in Breaking Bad, but at the very least, it could work harder at keeping my attention, and who am I kidding? This show just clearly isn't for me. I know many people who love it, and I myself liked it, but this was by far the hardest show to stick through the entire year. Each hour-long episode tested my patience, and getting to the end is something that I'm proud that I did, but I will definitely never do again. Until season 6, of course. I mean, I gotta finish the story.
Come on, anything. Anything but Morty. Let's go. Come on, baby. No whammies.
I don't have too much to say about the newest season of Rick and Morty, other than this might be the weakest season so far in some ways. Don't get me wrong, I really liked a lot of the episodes, and I don't feel like the show is bad at all, but I think more so than usual, a lot of the self contained episodes are losing their edge and becoming a little bit basic. I hear people say that season 3 is the worst season of the show, but I see that season as having some of the best episodes of the whole show mixed in with a few mediocre ones. Season 5 consists of a lot more misses than hits to me, where I only really enjoyed the first few episodes and the last few. Episodes 4 through 7 specifically felt like a vacuum of creativity to me, and I wasn't really that engaged with the season as a whole because of that. But to give credit where credit is due, the first 3 episodes were pretty fun and unique, and really radiated with the classic Rick and Morty charm. And the last 3 episodes were pretty exciting because they focused more on the world building and furthering the overarching plot, which up until now has been moving at a snail's pace. Episode 8 specifically explored Rick's past in new and unique ways, as well as exploring his complex relationship with Bird Person, with great action and comedy as a cherry on top. Because of that, Episode 8 was by far my favorite episode of the season. The season finale was pretty cool too, when it opts to actually change the status quo in a big way that I still don't completely understand, but it's still cool nonetheless. So yeah, I really ended up liking this season. I just wish that a couple more episodes were as good as the others. One of the most iconic parts of 2021 was watching WandaVision with everyone else in the world when it came out weekly, and it was the only Marvel show this year with that level of global interest. Elizabeth Olsen and Paul Bettany really do a great job on the show, and their characters are a lot more interesting in this than any of the movies they were in. My favorite part of the show was definitely the first few episodes where it was mostly a standard sitcom because it was a genuinely entertaining sitcom, as well as a bizarre mystery begging for answers. As the show slowly reverted into a regular superhero show, I was admittedly pretty sad to see the sitcom and overall mystery be slowly put down, but the superhero shenanigans were kind of fun, I guess. The twist of the season, while not super surprising, was really fun and brought a lot of whimsicality to the show. Overall, the story was pretty well done and had me on the edge of my seat the whole time. I'll never forget how much the world responded to the show, with effectively everyone talking about it non-stop after each episode. None of the Marvel shows afterwards, or movies for that matter, not including Spider Man, had such a genuine response from the world. So, in retrospect, it was just really a great time.
Disappointing my kids.
Is it crazy to say that Hawkeye was the most consistently high quality Marvel show so far? Because honestly, it felt like the most consistently high quality Marvel show so far. I love the characters, I love the action, and there's a very nice Christmas charm to the show that makes me like it even more. And the most surprising thing of all is that the ending wasn't bad. It's not amazing or anything, but unlike the previous shows, it doesn't completely collapse on itself by the end, and that's a win in my book. I don't have too much more to say about this show, given it was a really short watch, but I'm happy they're getting somewhat better at it and not worse. Also, Moon Knight just came out when I started recording this, and I am way more invested in that than I am with any of these other shows. Hopefully it stays good, fingers crossed. For some reason, it didn't quite click in my head that this show was going to be by far the longest one I watched for this challenge, despite knowing that it was 9 seasons long, with the 10th one coming out. But to be fair, each season is its own standalone story, so seeing the show as a bunch of smaller shows is valid. But for sparing time, I will not go into detail on each season and will instead try to focus on the show as a whole. It's good. Every season has its own theme that is really refreshing and unique to itself. This allows the series to tackle all sorts of horror subgenres like ghosts, vampires, Satanism, and the 2016 election. They do a great job of immersing you into each season that once you start watching one, it's quite hard to stop. The show has a great batch of actors that come and go for each season, the 2 most prominent ones being Sarah Paulson and Evan Peters, who are phenomenal in absolutely every role they're given, especially because their characters range from being the grounded normal type people reacting to the horror to being the evilest, most demonic creatures imaginable. The entire cast does a fantastic job each season selling their characters, that if anything, that's the whole purpose of the show. You never see actors show off their range quite as much as an American Horror Story, and I honestly adore the show for that aspect. When it comes to each season's story, there is a fair number of consistent flaws that the show can't seem to shake off. The most prominent one to me is just the issue with each season's length. Each season starts off pretty strong, with twists and turns that really give the show its flavor, and the novelty of these plots wear off after about 5 or 6 episodes. Every season has about 9 to 13 episodes, and almost without fail, I will get tired of the season by the last few. There's usually a point in each season where the main conflict gets resolved early, and the characters continue on facing newer, yet less interesting conflicts. They struggle through them until the finale, where, I don't know, someone or everyone dies, and that's the end. The finale is usually pretty good, but it does become tedious to get to the end sometimes. And I do mean sometimes. There are a few seasons that handle that problem better to me, and those seasons are Roanoke, 1984, and maybe Colt. Those seasons are on the shorter side of episodes, anyways, though, so that doesn't come as much of a surprise. After everything was said and done, choosing which seasons were my favorite and least favorite out of the batch turned out to be surprisingly difficult. I think most of them are on the exact same scale of quality. I think I ended up liking Asylum, Coven, Freak Show, Roanoke, and 1984 all pretty equally. Hotel, Cult, and Murder House were also good, but weren't my favorite, and Apocalypse was probably the messiest season of them all, but I don't even dislike it, so not much can be said. Wait, what's happening? Oh god, no. American Horror Story Season 10! I have so much to say about Season 10, and I don't want to spend too much time on it because this video is already so long, but wow, this season was astonishingly bad. I genuinely have no idea what happened to the writers of American Horror Story because this, plus all of American Horror Stories, is just awful. All I have to say is the first 5 episodes were good, some were great even, and the last 5 episodes are the 5 worst episodes of the whole series. God damn. An anxiety inducing battle royale centered around kids' games. What's not to love? There's a great cast of characters, all with unique personalities and flaws, who all get a satisfying arc throughout the season, with the exception of that police officer guy, who I'm really just confused by. I mean, I predicted that the front man was his brother and all, but what exactly did that entire side story lead up to? I mean, there was no satisfying conclusion to that very long storyline, and unless they're planning on a season 2, which I think they are at this point, then that half of the story was pretty disappointing to me. But that aside, the main story is fantastic throughout, with heavy hitting moments, hyper stressful games, and some painfully over the top gore that's the cherry on top. I don't know if I liked the overall ending or not, but no matter how I feel about it, it was not enough to soil the whole experience, so all I can say is that I really enjoyed this show. Alright, I'll be completely honest. Almost everything I just said was ripped verbatim from my review for Squid Game on Letterboxd. Speaking of which, you should go check out my profile on Letterboxd. My plan is to someday rate and review every single movie I have ever seen on there. So if you want to see my opinion on something, go look for it. I watch a movie practically every day, so there's always new reviews and ratings for you to check out. Plus, writing reviews is a lot easier than making a video about it, so if there is a Gavin-sized hole in your heart, then please go check out my Letterboxd profile. I'll leave a link for it in the description. But you should finish watching this video first, though, alright? Please.
Well, that sucks. Probably keeps you from doing a lot of things, like being present for bloody murders.
Only Murders in the Building is a rare breed of shows that is somehow incredibly dark, yet surprisingly charming at the same time. All of that charisma comes down to the main trio, played by Steve Martin, Martin Short, and Selena Gomez, who work off each other so well and are a match made in heaven. The plot relies on them creating a podcast on a murder that took place in the apartment building they live in, and them doing whatever it takes to solve that murder themselves. They have suspects and clues like any good murder mystery, and many good plot twists and reveals to keep you engaged the whole time. I'm not going to spoil this show like I did for some of the others, because unlike those shows, there is a really good chance that you have probably never heard of this one, but I highly recommend this show, especially to people who like the slowly dying murder mystery genre.
Tara?
Fuck it. That's my boy.
The Boys is a delightfully dark and violent show with a surprising amount of heart. This show tackles real world issues and relationships so realistically that it's painfully difficult to watch at times, and I like it that way. It's pretty intense to watch your protagonists survive the evil embodiment of the Justice League when they themselves have next to nothing to protect themselves with. The graphic violence is quite a spectacle in this show, and it's pretty terrifying to see helpless people get brutally murdered. You try to imagine yourself in the shoes of the people on screen, and you fundamentally know that you would be royally fucked. Violence aside, this show does an incredible job with its characters. Going into the show, I thought it was a black and white story where the protagonists were the good guys and the superheroes were the bad ones. And for the most part, that didn't end up being true. Every single character, with the exception of like two completely corrupt people, are pretty human. They might be total dicks and do unforgivable things, but the show somehow allows you to feel for the other characters and understand their inner turmoil. This might be a little spoilery, but let's just take the character A-Train for example. He is the inciter of the violence in the show, notoriously killing someone by running into them at superhuman speed. And he also comes off as a total douchebag, barely owning up to his despicable mistakes. Somehow, by the end of the show, I still think all of those things about him, and yet I actually really like the guy. He's not much of a pervert like everyone else, and you do see that he is actually suffering on the inside because of the terrible things he does. He's not a great person by any means, but he is a very well written and very well acted one. The show is packed with very complicated characters like these, and that makes the strong story and the graphic action that much greater. I can't wait for season 3, and you should definitely check this one out if you haven't already.
What's an anime? We have much to discuss.
With this show, I filled my anime quota for the year. In no way do I consider myself an anime fan, but to be an impartial TV critic, I must allow myself to watch shows deemed worthy. My anime adventure started in 2020 with the cult classic Death Note, which, to say the least, was fantastic in every conceivable way. For my TV watching experience, this year I decided to watch every available episode of Attack on Titan, and it did not disappoint. The first 2 seasons of the show are some of the most intense and exciting episodes of any show I have ever seen. The action is absolutely fantastic, and I cannot express just how awesome the ODM gear is. The plot of the show is exciting and very original, giving me a new dystopian world that I can fall in love with. The premise alone allows for so much creativity and freedom that's been missing from modern television. There are major plot twists that are mind-blowing and epic, there are character arcs that are inspiring and a joy to watch, and I still can't give enough praise to the action, goddammit. As the show progresses, it becomes less of an apocalypse show and more of a military show. But I haven't seen any show pull off a change of tone as well as this one. The progression is absolutely perfect, and the show doesn't even need to try to keep your attention. Probably the only complaint that I can give this show is that there are a handful of characters in desperate need of a lot more character development, as they are way hollower than they probably should be. And that complaint itself is merely a sacrifice that the show made to have even more epic action scenes that, once again, are awesome. Sadly, watching all available episodes of the show led me to realize that the end of the show will not be released until 2023, which I wasn't aware of going into the show. So, I am currently waiting patiently like everybody else for the rest, and I very much hope it ends with a bang. Until then, you should definitely check this one out if you haven't seen it yet. Damn, American Horror Story wishes it could be this emotional, compelling, consistently good, cohesive, stylistic, well-written, engaging, well-acted, tight-scripted, genuinely scary, etc. That about summarizes my whole thoughts on The Haunting of Hill House, but let me elaborate a little bit more. The Haunting of Hill House is the first show I've seen that actually does horror well. That's not to say shows like American Horror Story or The Walking Dead are bad by any means, but what they lack compared to Hill House is genuine scariness. Hill House goes for your classic ghostly horror show, with freakish jump scares, intensely terrifying sequences, and an overall unease with every scene. The show manages to find a sweet spot by actively engaging you with a rich story and then pulling the rug out from beneath you and giving you a really good scare. The The story follows a family of 7 who have been tortured and broken by a haunted house they grew up in. The show actively switches between the characters when they lived in the house and what they're up to in the modern day, showing us how each and every character has been forever changed by the events of their past. We follow the characters as they piece together the story of the house and attempt to overcome their trauma, while terrible things come to haunt them yet again. I'm not going to say much more about the show because I highly recommend you watch it if you haven't already. But before I finish this segment, I want to briefly mention that episode 6 of the show is one of the greatest episodes of any show I watched in 2021. It's a cinematic feast, a bone-chilling story, and an absolute gem of an episode, so once again, please check out this show. Infinity Train is a show about people suffering from their internal struggles and learning how to deal with them and grow from them. The characters, who are in their time of need, find themselves on a magical train designed to show them what they need to learn. As the characters move from car to car, they gain new friends, face new challenges, and overcome their own obstacles. Every season brings a new and exciting adventure, with lovable characters, compelling stories, a great sense of humor, and an insane level of creativity brought to you by the concept of the show. My absolute favorite thing about the show, however, is the atmosphere it manages to create. The music, the writing, and the animation pair up to give off a very unique, mysterious, nearly hypnotic charm that's almost indescribable and makes the story so much more engaging and compelling. Infinity Train is that rare breed of cartoons that only Cartoon Network can pull off well, and it's a shame that we most likely will never get to see the end of the story, as for no good reason it was cancelled prematurely. The best thing we can do as fans of this show is give it as much attention as possible in hopes of persuading Cartoon Network to give it another chance. If you haven't seen the show yet, I implore you to check it out. It's a very quick watch, and I guarantee you'll love it the way I do.
Why are you police officers?
I blew up Malaysia.
Once upon a time, I thought that watching Arrested Development would be the end of my modern sitcom journey. I thought it was the last piece of a 4-part puzzle consisting of The Office, Parks and Rec, Arrested Development, and Community. But I was wrong. Like, really wrong. At some point in this last year, I was shown the vast world of critically acclaimed modern sitcoms, and I knew my journey was far from over, leading me to the 9-9. Brooklyn Nine-Nine, a show about detectives in the NYPD living an exciting comedic life. This might just be recency bias, but I'm really starting to believe that this show is my second favorite show of those aforementioned modern sitcoms, but I can safely say that Community hasn't been dethroned as my favorite sitcom. This show lasted me about 4 full months, and that's due to a lot of procrastination early on in the show when I was juggling many shows at the exact same time. It took me about 2 full weeks to watch seasons 3 through 8 because that was essentially the only show that I watched for those 2 weeks, and I do not regret it. This show was incredible. Every single character is so lovable, and it's hard for me to choose my favorite between Jake, Captain Holt, Rosa, and Terry. I wasn't a huge fan of Gina, but she leaves the show early on, so it really doesn't matter that much. Most episodes revolve around detective work, so while the characters are entertaining you with their personalities, you also get a mini mystery to enjoy as the cherry on top. There are some fantastic recurring episodes and characters, like Doug Judy, the criminal who slowly becomes Jake's best friend by the end of the series, and the Halloween Heist, which is an exciting heist with twists and turns that gets more and more complicated with every season. There's so much more that I can talk about, but what really matters is the point that I want to make. Brooklyn Nine-Nine was probably the most fun show I've watched this year. From start to finish, this show is an onslaught of fantastic jokes and a beautiful union of many fantastic characters into what they consider themselves to be a family. Eat your heart out, Arrested Development, because I found my favorite sitcom of the year. Or so I thought.
Think, Mark! Think!
I had many shows that I planned on watching as soon as I started this project, but there were a handful of shows that sprung up out of nowhere and caught my attention. Invincible was by far the most surprising show that came out this year, just in terms of how truly amazing it turned out to be. An important detail as to why this show works so well for me is because I went into it completely blind, which according to most people was insanely difficult. As most of you may know, the most important scene of the show became a meme almost instantly, so 90% of people's introduction to the show was because of that meme alone. Luckily for me, though, I had good friends who implored me to check out the show before I saw any spoilers. And I'm going to offer the same benefit to you, as I highly recommend you go and watch the show before I say anything at all about it, if in case you haven't already. Alright, now that that has been said, let me tell you my completely original and unique opinion of this show. It's fantastic. Truly, one of the most intense, mind-blowing, and exceptionally written shows I have had the pleasure of watching. It all works for me. The action, the violence, the characters, it really has it all. Not to mention the incredible voice cast. Stephen Yeun and J.K. Simmons as the two main characters? Holy shit, it's a dream come true! Those are literally two of my all-time favorite actors, and they're just fantastic in their roles. But everyone else is great too. Literally all of the central characters are voiced by people who I highly respect and do such an incredible job in their roles. And the writing pushes the acting even further, with some fantastic dialogue that really sells each and every character perfectly. Robert Kirkman is a fantastic writer and did such a great job of transitioning his comics onto the small screen, much like Walking Dead. Which leads me to the story. Dear God, the story is brilliant. Omni-Man is one of the most intimidating characters I've ever seen, and is slowly built up over the course of the season as the most dangerous being in cinematic history. Most of the middle is just the progression of the main story, that keeps changing and introducing things in preparation for the bombastic final episode. And holy shit, that final episode is insane. That last episode had my jaw on the floor with just how gruesome they were willing to go with it. That fight scene will go down as one of the best action scenes of all time, and to top it all off, the destruction is ended by an insanely well acted and emotional scene that became a meme just by how damn crazy good the acting was. Seriously, J.K. Simmons is a gift, and he deserves so much praise. Words cannot easily describe the rapidly changing emotions this show thrusts upon you, and there will probably never be a superhero show that'll start off as good as this one. I have such high hopes for Season 2, and I really hope it can match this season, or somehow beat the season in quality.
By the power of moonlight, I have risen, Hoot Hoot!
Owl House, Owl House, Owl House, Owl House, Minecraft Steve, fuck. Alright, Owl House, let's go. Wow, this show was a welcome surprise. I spent many months watching dark and serious shows like American Horror Story or Better Call Saul, to the point that I desperately needed something upbeat and happy. And I knew that Disney was most likely the best thing to turn to. I haven't been on the Disney Channel scene since Gravity Falls ended, so obviously, coming back I was a bit skeptical of its quality. But once I got through the first episode of The Owl House, I knew that nothing has changed and they're still bringing their A game. This show is a true spiritual successor to Gravity Falls, both in terms of atmosphere and the fact that Alex Hirsch voices a quarter of the full cast. But this show is different than Gravity Falls in the sense that every single episode matters. Gravity Falls is still one of the best series I've ever seen, but I can make a case for one or two episodes that didn't push the character arcs or main story. Like, at all. And while I still like those episodes, The Owl House really does something incredible and adds none of that filler whatsoever. Characters change every episode, and the writers aren't afraid at all to change the status quo and move the main story along. The show is only 1.5 seasons at the time of me writing this, and it's already done so much more than shows that are 3 times its length. And the characters are just wonderful. It's a great sign for the quality of a TV show when nearly every single character is equally your favorite. Last Airbender, Gravity Falls, even Breaking Bad have such amazingly written three-dimensional characters that it's hard to hate anybody. Except Skylar. This show is on par, where I can't decide if Luz, King, Ida, Amity, Hootie, Gus, or that weird redheaded soccer ball kid with the big nose are my favorite characters. They're all so charismatic and lovable that each and every episode packs a lot of heart. On top of that, the action scenes are exhilarating, the jokes are surprisingly sharp, and the episode Knock Knock Knockin' on Hootie's Door is television at its finest. The only flaws I ever saw on the show took place very early on, where I thought that the episode structure was pretty vanilla and taught very simple and elementary life lessons. But obviously, this is still a kids' show, so expecting them to break the conventions and cliches of modern animation would be asking a bit too much anyways. Except for the fact that they actually did do that further in the show. Would you look at that? The only real complaint I had with the show resolved itself within the first season. Truly inspiring. If you haven't checked out this show yet, and you've been waiting for someone to tell you to, then here you have it. Go watch it. right now.
Back in the 90s, I was in a very famous TV show.
Bojack Horseman is an incredible journey from start to finish, and there's not much I can say that hasn't already been said 100 times. For an adult animated show about anthropomorphic animals living regular human lives, it's all incredibly unassuming. Even the first few episodes seem like a very generic adult comedy, with dry humor and a cast of very quirky characters. It's not until the latter half of the first season when we get several glimpses at what the show will become. Bojack is a bad person, and starting from the beginning, we watch as his bad actions continue to negatively affect his life path, and time after time again do we see him try to do better, but flounder in the moment and make everything worse. Every season changes the dynamics of Bojack's life, leading to many highs and lows in his life and the lives of the people he associates with. There are so many great moments all throughout the show that teach deep and hard-hitting lessons about relationships, drug abuse, extreme emotions, and the uncertainty of life. There is a pattern in the show, where the second to last episode of each season provides a major turning point in the show, usually having something horrible happen because of Bojack's actions. There are also some out-of-nowhere episodes that are feats of writing and directing, like an episode without dialogue, or an episode that only features Bojack giving a eulogy for 26 minutes straight. All of these episodes are some of the best episodes of any show I have watched for this video. These episodes are unforgettable and really make your head spin in the best way possible. The best episode by far, though, is the 15th episode of the last season, where Bojack confronts every major traumatic event of his life and learns to accept and grow from those moments. Bojack also confronts mortality in a way I've never seen done on television that's incredibly dark, but taken very seriously. To say the least, my jaw was on the floor after this episode. Now, to rewind a little, there are a few things about this show that hold it back from being the best show of the year. Several seasons of the show can get a little slow at times, several character arcs can be a little uninteresting at times, and while there are some god-tier jokes in this show, I don't think the humor always lands. Even with these flaws, I cannot refrain myself from giving this show anything other than a perfect 10 out of 10, because it's truly something special. If you're ready for a show that'll change your life, then I cannot recommend this show enough to you. Game of Thrones was the very first show that I watched for this project. I knew that I needed a big show to start off on in order to set the standard high for the rest of the shows, and boy did I set that bar high. It's already been so long since I watched the show, and I still remember the full story like I watched it just yesterday. I'll quickly go through the seasons, but I'll refrain from any major spoilers because this is not a show that I want to spoil for any of you. Season 1 is a great world builder that sets the tone for the seasons to come. The very first episode alone has many great scenes that serves as the show's sharp hook. We meet all of the beloved characters who will probably at one point or another die gruesomely, but for this first season, there isn't too much violence or war. Instead, this season serves as the base for conflicts to come, and boy do they come, because by the end of this season, the lines have been crossed, and as a viewer, I couldn't be any more engaged. Season 2 focuses on those rising conflicts between the large capitals of Westeros, and also on some smaller stories taking place in the corners of the world that will have much bigger ramifications later on. This season was probably my least favorite season in the first half of the show, because the story is pretty slow moving, and there is a moderately large focus on the Baratheon story, who is by far the least interesting batch of characters in the entire show. By the end of Season 2, King's Landing is properly shown to be the juggernaut everyone fears they are, and there are some very entertaining betrayals that you would not expect. Season 3 takes the show to some new heights, ensuring that no characters are safe from harm, and major turning points can happen when you least expect them. This season is a roller coaster from start to finish. Every single character gets their own journey and overcomes serious obstacles for the sake of survival, and by this point in the show, I was deeply invested in the lore of the world and its inhabitants. Season 4 was the final piece of evidence that I needed to know that this show was a masterpiece, and I don't put that lightly. The story goes from entertaining to phenomenally well written and masterfully handled this time around, with moments that will make you cheer, cry, and fall in love with the fantastic characters. This season has moments that are some of my all-time favorite scenes in any show ever, and the icing on this delicious cake is for the first time in 4 seasons there is not a single boring character in the show. Somehow, despite knowing which characters are in the right or in the wrong, I love them all equally and wish nothing bad would happen to any of them. Special props go to my boy Jaime Lannister, who I thought would be a completely unlikable douchebag at the start of the show, and he somehow became the most lovable character I think I've ever seen on television. I cannot stress just how much I love this man who has intentionally tried to kill a child and is in an active sexual relationship with his own sister. This guy, this character is one of the most emotionally moving characters in the whole show. Holy shit, the writing is magical. But enough of this wonderful character, let's talk about his equally amazing brother instead. This season gives the intellectual dwarf his time to shine, when he has to defend himself for a murder he didn't commit. His arc through this season is the most inspiring and emotional arc through the whole show, and the ending of this arc in the last episode of the season is fantastic in every way and proves once and for all that Tyrion Lannister is the best character in the show as well. Season 5 is a slower season, as the dust settles from the chaos of the prior two seasons. Much like Season 2, this season works to stir up conflicts and major events for the near future. But there are many great episodes that establish the power and motive for each of the kingdoms, and many great battles with massive stakes. The finale this season, much like the finales of seasons prior, have major events with huge ramifications on the rest of the series. Jaime gets another fantastic arc this season that ends in one of my favorite scenes of the show. Other major characters find themselves with new allies and new enemies. It's only occurred to me now, despite the fact that I'm all the way up to Season 6 at this point, that I've only touched on one or two of the major stories all happening at the same time. Jon Snow is debatedly the main character of the show, and has had some really intense and emotional arcs through all the seasons. And Daenerys, another key player, has been working hard alongside even more wonderfully charming characters to abolish slavery around the world. Jon, Dany, and the King's Landing stories are all definitely the three most prominent stories taking place in the show, but it's still important to acknowledge that there are 5 or 6 other stories happening around Westeros, all equally important for the remainder of the show. Season 6 is a continuation of many arcs happening in Season 5, including war, the emotional unification of characters who haven't seen each other in years, and a rising religious threat that needs to be taken down before it's too late. The finale of this season is a conclusive one that ends many of the major conflicts and puts many of the chess pieces in their proper places for the final 2 seasons. But there's just one problem with that. This is the point where the writing quality of the show dips. While Season 6 was very good, it's important to note that the show was taking its story almost entirely from the existing novels, but the novels still aren't done yet, and the last book that was released only takes us to the end of Season 5. Season 7 isn't bad by any means, don't get me wrong, but it's still apparent that the writing quality is not as masterful as it used to be. Some characters don't act exactly the same, and a lot of the smaller details that used to make the world feel real aren't taken seriously and end up making the show less engaging. This season also happens to be another supporting season that yet again will mainly be used to set up the upcoming final season. The first novel thing about this season, however, is how it is able to combine characters and their storylines into one main story, and the number of side quests happening all at once is shortened significantly. Season 8 of the show is where the huge problems lie. It is super painful to admit this, but this season ruins the whole show. It concludes all of the major stories in epic battles of grand proportion, but it ruins the character arcs and completely ruins the direction that the show is heading, at least in terms of the character Daenerys, in my opinion, of course. I don't completely hate the ending, but I really just wish the ending of the show would have been something truly spectacular, a perfect cap to an amazing series, but instead, what we got was a mediocre ending, and that hurts a lot, because now I can't tell people that it's a perfect show. Now I have to say that it's a near perfect show, and that's just not the same. No matter what, though, I have to give him credit for the most consistent thing throughout, the acting. Writing quality aside, every single character is performed flawlessly from start to finish. The world building would not be the same if it weren't for such incredible acting to really sell you on it all. And I'm grateful for the ability to have gotten so immersed into such a wonderful show. Oh yeah, did I mention the nudity? Yeah, there's a lot of nudity in this show. They really don't hold back on it. It was pretty awkward watching this at school. It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia was the easiest first place I could have ever possibly given. This might very well be my favorite show of all time, and much like Brooklyn Nine-Nine, I didn't even know it existed until the day I started watching it. That day was in early November of 2021, and I was easily able to finish it by the end of the year, even though it is 15 seasons long with 162 episodes. For a show with so many episodes, you'd think there would be somewhat of a decline in quality as it goes along like most great shows, but no, the show is still at its prime today and has never had a bad episode. But to get to the point, Always Sunny is simply the funniest show ever. Every single episode is hysterical, thanks in no small part to the perfect 5-star cast of Caitlin Olsen, Rob McElhenney, Glenn Howerton, Charlie Day, and the legendary Danny DeVito. The point of the show, for those of you that don't know, is, well, it's nothing. The spotlight is on the 5 characters who are the biggest scumbags in all of Philly and the interactions they have in their life. As the gang goes about their day, they will either try to take advantage of it or fall victim to their own shortcomings. Usually both.
I am untethered and my rage knows no bounds!
I've been rewatching all of this show for the entirety of 2022, which is something I haven't done with any of the other shows I watched on this list, but I just can't get enough. It's awesome. It's perfect. It's the best show I watched in 2021. So that's it then. I'm done ranking all the shows I watched in 2021. And now that I know how difficult it would be to do it again, you will most certainly not get a 2022 TV showdown, sadly. As we wrap up now, let me elaborate a little and explain that I've been working on this series of videos since November of 2021. The first segment I edited was for M.O.D.O.K, and the rest came after, of course. On average, it takes 2 to 3 hours per segment, and if you add all that up, it's a lot of fucking work. And I'm a procrastinator, if you couldn't tell, but you should be as happy as I am that I at least finished this project in 2022. If this leaked into next year, that would have been embarrassing, right? I like to view this project as my starting off point for wanting to do more video essays, but now that I see how much work goes into that, it remains to be seen how much more I'll work at it. The biggest payoff, however, is how much better my editing has gotten. It's not great by any means, and I'm too lazy to edit this part, so it's just going to be this PNG probably, but I really think I've improved over the year, and that should be reflected as you watch every segment in order. Anyways, I'm tired, and I'm ready to close this out, so thank you so much for joining me on this long-awaited TV Showdown finale, and I'll see you when I see you.